I read Lightlark by Aster, and it wasn't as bad as I was expecting. So, this is a young adult romance fantasy novel about a fantasy world where the six rulers have to meet in a central island every 100 years for 100 days to compete against each other, kind of, for power supreme and to try and break the curses that have been on all of their realms for the last 500 years. It's a weird premise, to say the least. It's not the most original, but I found the world building to be surprisingly good despite that. I thought that Aster did a pretty good job with her character developments and her world building. It's not perfect by any means, and I don't think it's anything extraordinary, but when you look through the lens of young adult romance, I think it does hit the marks that it needs to well enough. It's not perfect, like I said. There's a lot of holes you can find in the plot, and a lot of really weird occurrences that felt like it could have used a second run through the drafting process, or maybe a second pair of eyes looking at it and saying, hey, maybe you should either explain this better or change it entirely. I also, this is one thing I noticed personally, but there's a section where they're drinking tea and the main character finishes her cup of tea twice, which I thought was kind of funny. So this book also has a love triangle, as is, I guess, expected in novels like this. And while I do find the character Grimm to be very similar and almost quoting verbatim Edward Cullen, I do think that the love triangle here is better than Twilight's. I do think that the relationships were well developed, especially between Isla and Oro. I found the writing as a whole to be a bit of a mixed bag. I thought that Aster had a really fun way of writing at times, a really great use of prose, and writing in a way that very much fit her target audience, but was also not so patronizing or hard to read as someone who doesn't normally read that genre, because this very much was a little out of my wheelhouse. It was mostly something that I was doing for fun with one of my friends, because the original premise was we wanted to read a bad book together because she loves reading bad books, and I was like, yeah, I heard of this book the other week, and yeah, let's read it together because we'll just have a fun time shitting on this book. And I really, honestly, don't have a huge amount of negatives to say that aren't things that I think Aster can improve on as she grows as a writer, because I really do think that Aster does have talent as a writer, even though her ideas don't always feel fully formed, and her writing does almost feel a little lazy at times. I do think that's unintentional. I do think that she can become a very talented and very accomplished author with more time and more experience. And I do think that that will hopefully show through in the sequels to Lightlark, but we'll have to see, I guess. So I learned of this book a couple weeks back. I had never heard of it. I don't really keep up with young adult or even romance for that matter. I learned about it through a YouTube review that was recommended to me, and I had never heard of Lightlark, and I had never heard of Book Talk, as it's called, because I do not use TikTok. So I felt this would be a perfect book to read as a... I figured in a similar vein of how you would watch something like The Room or like a Michael Bay movie. But I still had a lot of fun in the end with this novel. So I'm going to go into a little bit of spoiler territory for now. So if you haven't read this book or want to, and you don't want to hear any spoilers, skip forward to here. So I found the climax of this book to be by far the worst part of it. I found it to be very sloppy, very rushed, like Aster had kind of gotten to this point and didn't have an exact plan, and maybe had like the framework of how the climax was going to go, but didn't have like the details ready. So she just kind of slapped this together. So when it's revealed that her best friend and the ruler of the Skyling Kingdom, Celeste, was actually Aurora, the original Skyling ruler that created the curses in the first place, but because she created the curses, she was not cursed with the Skyling's curse of only being able to live 25 years. And she's just been parading as a new ruler every 100 years for each new centennial, and she's been building this huge plot. This is all given to you in a monologue while Isla, Grimm, and Oro are just sitting there, incapacitated for lack of a better term, just listening to her just devolve her plan to everybody. And it's really sloppy. I don't necessarily think the plot behind it is bad, but the execution just really took me out, and I was so ready to give this book a higher rating, because to me it was only getting better and better, and I went from being, this book is goofy fun that I'm going to laugh at and be like, this was bad but I had a good time, to me being like, this is legitimately like becoming a very actually good book. I actually was really enjoying it. I thought the second half was really good until the climax, and to have Isla just teleport out of the area, go back to her home, suit up, come back, and just go on, and you see the moment where she turns on badass mode and just starts just wrecking everything in her path. And I don't know, I'm not someone that can say confidently whether or not someone like Isla is a Mary Sue character, but I definitely could see an argument both ways as to whether she is or isn't. But to have her just kind of do that, and granted, this is not something new for her character, that she just is suddenly able to do these things, but even still, for her to be in that compromised position to where she can't do anything against this now major villain that has just come literally out of nowhere, and just teleport away, come back, have all of these weapons available now, and just start killing all of her bark minions in her way, and eventually get up to kill Aurora in the way that she does by stabbing her in the heart with the bond maker, which was a pretty bad MacGuffin in my opinion as well. I didn't think the bond maker was very interesting, and I thought the bond breaker was a pretty dumb idea that probably wouldn't necessarily not go anywhere, but I figured it would not be the main important thing. I thought it would be not necessarily a red herring, but something that it would turn out would not be what they needed in order to achieve their goals, and that's technically true, but it turns into it being the bond maker after all, which is this huge MacGuffin to where it's like, now all your powers belong to me, which is honestly really silly, and just a really poor way to have Aurora be this major maniacal presence, only for it to mean nothing in the end, because all she's able to do is use wildling powers because they are in the plot convenient place of mirrors where only wildling powers are available. And it's really silly, it's really dumb, and it failed as a climax and as an action scene for me. And that really bumps me out, because like I said, I had actually been really enjoying the book up to this point. And so she kills Aurora, and it's all hunky-dory, and it turns out she loves Oro instead of Grimm, which I thought was the correct choice at this point in time in the novel. This is going to be a series, at least 2 books as far as I'm aware, probably more, and I feel like the way that the characters were developed at this point in time, especially how Oro and Isla's relationship was developed in the second half of the book, it felt much more natural to me for her to choose Oro than for her to choose Grimm, despite learning that her and Grimm have been having a relationship for the last year. And besides that, regardless of what his motives were, the fact that Grimm was working for Aurora and intentionally removing her memories of them, in his eyes for her protection, was really scummy, a really horrible thing to do. And yeah, while he may love her and he does that out of love, it's still something that he betrayed her with. Even if he doesn't necessarily think it's a bad betrayal or something that he did in his eyes, for her or for them, it's still a major betrayal, and it's just a horrible character moment. I'm not saying it's a bad character moment, it's a horrible character moment in the sense that this is Grimm being a horrible person, and I think that her realizing that and choosing Oro instead was a very realistic and natural process, and I actually am happy with her having chose Oro. That being said, I'm sure that the triangle is going to stay strong in the sequels, and we will actually get this will they, won't they for her and Grimm as well, because they have that history, and he does say, oh, you will come back to me once you get your memories back, which is kind of creepy if we're being honest here. But yeah, and it ends on a cliffhanger that I similarly loved and hated at the same time. I got to that page and I'm like, oh, this is the last page of the book, isn't it? And then it was the end of the book, and I'm like, okay, I'll see you in November. So yeah, end of spoilers here. As a whole, I didn't hate Lightlark near as much as I thought I would. It's silly, it's dumb. The sheer number of accessory weapons that she has, like her bracelets turning into daggers, or her hairpin being a ninja star, it became a running joke between me and my friend. Every time I would see that, I would just, all caps in our chat, just shout, oh my god, I can't believe this accessory is now this weapon. It became a joke to me, and that's kind of silly, and it feels kind of amateur to me, but it's fun. It's fun, it's goofy. I wouldn't take away anything from the book because of instances like that, because it just, to me, it's part of the fun. This is a fantasy young adult romance novel about a girl who is really young, somewhere probably between the ages of like 19 and 22, being put in this crazy, ridiculous fantasy setting and being a badass at what she does and just doing it. And it's fun. It's nothing really crazy. This isn't Tolkien. This isn't Brandon Sanderson. This is just a fun novel. This isn't even Stephanie Meyer. And I mean absolutely no shade to Stephanie Meyer. She was successful at what she did, and I don't like Twilight. I've read all the Twilight books twice, and I don't like them. But I can respect what Stephanie Meyer did, despite the fact that I do not think she is that great of an author. I do think that Alex Aster does have more potential as an author than Stephanie Meyer. Not necessarily than Stephanie Meyer had, but that Stephanie Meyer became, because I think Stephanie Meyer became lazy with Twilight. But I do think Alex Aster does have a lot of potential as an author, and I do think she can become a lot better as she grows. And I actually am looking forward to Nightbane, the sequel to Lightlark, because I'm hoping that at the very least I'm going to have a similar fun time with it than I had with Lightlark. Or even better, if she's learned and grown as an author, I will have a better time with Nightbane than I did with Lightlark. So I guess we'll see. So with that, I am going to give Lightlark a 6 out of 10 for me. It was almost a 7 for me. It was so close to a 7, but the climax really stopped it from hitting that mark for me, which is unfortunate because, like I said, she did a great job building this story, building this world, and building these characters, at least the main characters. The side characters are pretty two-dimensional and don't get a huge amount of growth, and I'm really upset about that because there is so much potential for these side characters, and maybe this is something that will be hit on in the sequel, but there is so much potential for these side characters. They're very interesting. They started out really well and never grew from there, so I'm hoping that they get some more growth in the sequel and become more major characters, more fleshed out characters, but at least for the main characters, I do think that Alex Aster did a great job building them, building their relationship, building their motivations, and building who they are. So, yeah, I do think that what this book does well, it does very well, but what it does not do very well, it's a very mixed bag of laughably bad to questionable choices that just make you scratch your head and be like, well, that was weird, but anyways. But yeah, if this is something that you think is in your wheelhouse, something that you might enjoy, like I said, this is a young adult fantasy romance novel. There's nothing super gratuitous. There are implied sex scenes and some like slightly graphic almost sex scenes, so there's a content warning there if that is something that might stop you or even entice you towards the novel. This is not erotic. This is not an erotica novel. This is very much a young adult book, not a young kid to prepubescent kid book. But if this is something that you're into, I think you will have a good time with it. This is by no means a horrible book, but this is also by no means a fantastic book. It is not quite in the middle of the road for me, but a little better than average, I would say. So yeah, that was my opinion on Lightlark. This has been Dusty with a Sad Boys book review, and thank you for watching.